and thanks for having me for Think. And I have a difficult task in front of me. First of all, because I'm the last speaker in this session. So Andrew, how much time do I have?
We have 20 minutes, Amichai.
20 minutes. And I'll try to be exact in my time. And also because it's a hard act to follow after Yitzhak and Matthias giving this wide range of perspective regarding the issue. I apologize, I'm a lawyer. I look at the specific text and I'll try to speak today about the more specific Jewish and democratic identity of the current state of Israel. So moving from historical views since Abraham, I'll be very, I think, current. So I'll just try and share my screen, and please let me know if it works and if you can see. Just a second.
That seems to be working.
Just a second here. I think, just a second. Okay, is this good, Andrew?
Yes, that's very good, Amichai.
Okay, so I'm just, okay, I'll go to the first. Okay, so Israel is described as a Jewish and democratic state. Where is it stated that it's a Jewish and democratic state? Well, one source, I think the major legal source for this definition is Basic Law, Human Liberty and Dignity. I apologize for the typo at the heading. Well, Israel does not have a constitution. I asked Andrew beforehand if you went over the constitutional basics of Israel. He said no. I said I'll need an hour and a half to explain. But so we'll just skip over this issue. Israel does not have a formal constitution. It does, however, have basic laws which have an elevated status according to Israeli law, and the most important basic law is, or perhaps one of the most important basic laws, is Basic Law, Human Liberty and Dignity. It says explicitly the purpose of this basic law is to protect human dignity and liberty in order to establish in a basic law the values of the state of Israel as a Jewish and democratic state. So here we have enshrined in the basic law the idea that Israel is a Jewish and democratic state. What does it mean, a Jewish and democratic state? What we know, I think, what is a democracy, or at least we have some idea, although of course there are, just a second, sorry, there are discussions, but we can perhaps agree for the sake of our discussion here that democracy is defined by a democratic procedure and protection of some rights, at least rights with regards to the process of elections. So we know something about democracy, but what does it mean to have a Jewish state? What does it mean that the state is Jewish? Well, we can think about at least three meanings of a Jewish state. One is simply that there is a Jewish majority in the state of Israel. So most of the inhabitants of the state of Israel are Jews. So this is correct. About 80% of the inhabitants of Israel proper, I'm not speaking about the territories right now, are Jews. Of course, there is a discussion, what does it mean exactly to be Jewish, but let's leave it aside for a second. This is correct. The second meaning is self-determination of the nation state as a self-determination of the Jewish people. Is it an exclusive self-determination of the Jewish people? What exactly does it mean? This is a topic I'll discuss later. A third meaning, of course, and one which we will not discuss today, is a state that's run according to Jewish law. Okay, so there are Jewish values, specific, perhaps even Jewish law, which is the basic law of the Jewish state. Now, of course, if you adopt the first definition of a Jewish state, I think that there is no tension between democracy and a Jewish state. Of course, once there is a Jewish majority, then there is no tension with democracy. The third meaning might lead to tensions. So the idea of Jewish law as the law of the country might lead to some tensions with democracy. This is not the topic of my talk today. You will have to invite me, Andrew, to a different lecture if you want to understand the tensions between Jewish law and democracy in the modern state of Israel. This is not the topic. The third meaning is the meaning I want to speak about, is the Jewish nation state. Now, there are three potential tensions between Israel as a Jewish state, or the nation state of the Jewish people, and democracy. Three potential tensions. One is equality. So do non-Jews have equal rights in Israel? The second potential is prohibition on tension. So what happens if the majority of people within the state of Israel want to change this identity? Either because the majority is non-Jewish, or because somehow the majority decides it does not want this definition of the Jewish nation state. Can they change it? And the third potential tension between Jewish and democratic is that the minority does not feel that it's their country. So the national anthem, the flag, I would call it, there is no Republican citizenship. So even if they have formal citizenship, the Arabs or the non-Jews within the state of Israel, do they have full citizenship? Can they think about themselves as part of the country? So three potential tensions, and I'll try very shortly to speak about how the Israel confronted these three potential tensions. And I, as a lawyer, I'll speak mainly, although not exclusively, to the decisions of the Israeli Supreme Court, which dealt and confronted these tensions in several decisions. So let's speak about the first tension, and it's equality. And I must say, the Israeli Supreme Court dealt with the issue of the Jewish and democratic states from many aspects. Many of them internal Jewish, between Orthodox and Reform Jews, between the Jewish law, secular and religious Jews. But this is not my perspective once again here today. I'm just speaking about the Jewish and democratic character of the state of Israel with regards to the Arab minority and the way the court dealt with it. So once again, the first tension, the problem of equality. So the issue came before the Israeli Supreme Court in many cases, but perhaps the most important case is the Kaadan versus Israel Land Administration case of 2000, where the Jewish agency, which is a semi-governmental agency within Israel, which owns land in Israel, and with support of the Israel Land Administration Agency, built a settlement village that refused to accept Arabs, as they didn't sell land. So you had to buy a lot of land, and Arabs were not allowed to buy a lot of land. The claim was that Jews are allowed to build a village of their own. And before the Supreme Court, the claim was this is part of the Jewish identity of the state. And the court said, this is one of the most important decisions of Justice Aaron Barak, who was then the president of the Supreme Court. You have some of the text before you. but I'll just read the last paragraph. However, the values of the State of Israel as a Jewish and democratic state do not by any means suggest that the state will discriminate between its citizens. Both Jews and non-Jews are citizens with equal rights and duties in the State of Israel. So the court was very clear. Of course, it's not the first decision, it's not the last decision. Perhaps it's the most important decision of the court in this issue. In terms of equality, formal citizenship, there is no discrimination between Jews and Arabs, and discrimination here, the court emphasized, there is also no separate but equal. Okay, so the non-discrimination here also means non-separation. So in terms of the equal rights of the Arabs or non-Jews living in Israel, they have exactly the same rights. The state is not allowed to discriminate in any way or manner. So this is regarding the first tension, potential tension, the equality of citizens. Now, the second tension is, what about the identity of Israel? Can it be changed? And the tension is especially acute in the elections. So there were parties, Arab parties, or some of the Arab parties, when they come to the elections, they present their policies, and some of them are, we want to democratically change the identity of the State of Israel from the Jewish state to a state which belongs to all its citizens, not necessarily Jewish. And the Knesset passed the law to an amendment to basic law of the Knesset, which is once again a basic law, so it's part of the more hierarchically elevated level. A candidate list shall not participate in election to the Knesset, etc. One, negation of the existence of the State of Israel as a Jewish and democratic state. So if a party wants to change the identity of the State of Israel, this party cannot run in elections. Potentially, there is a tension here between the Jewish and democratic identity of the State of Israel, because a party cannot run to the Knesset when its platform specifically said that it wants to change the identity of the State of Israel. The reason I'm bringing it up is because up until now, not even one party was not allowed to run in the elections based on this specific article. There were parties that were not allowed to run to the election on the second, incitement to racism. This was a reason that the court accepted as a reason not to allow parties to run for the election. Also, support for armed struggle was also something the court was willing to accept. But the court, I won't go into the cases, we don't have time, but the court was very, very clear on its interpretation that in order for not allowing a party to run to the elections based on the first reason, negation of the Jewish of the democratic state, there has to be the party has to support violence in order to do it, not simply to support it. The court, and it was heavily criticized for it, but the court was very persistent in its interpretation that almost every party, even if its platform hints at negation of the existence, then should be allowed. Existence as a Jewish and democratic state should be allowed. Once again, the court here, in a sense, solved this tension. And the third tension is the idea of belonging. So is this a country that, if it's a country that belongs to the Jewish people, what do the non-Jews think about it? So is it also their country in the sense? And the question came to a clear discussion very recently in a 2018 basic law. Basic law, Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people. It was passed in 2018. And this law states explicitly, and you have before you the first article, the land of Israel is the historical homeland of the Jewish people in which the state of Israel was established. Of course, after hearing the eloquent presentations of Yitzchak and Matthias, you now know the background for this. The state of Israel is the nation state of the B. Article 1b, the state of Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people, in which it realizes its natural, cultural, religious, and historical right to self-determination, and 1c, the exercise of the right to national self-determination in the state of Israel is unique to the Jewish people. So 2 points here, and these were claims that were brought, and I will immediately speak about it in the 2 or 3 minutes that I have left. The question here is, does this article create some kind of discrimination against the non-Jews in Israel? So what does it mean? Article 1b, that it's the national nation state of the Jewish people, and as you see 1c, it's the exclusive nation state of the Jewish people. Only Jews can claim that Israel is their nation state. And the question came before the court. There were petitions to the court claiming that there are further positions. I don't have to go. I don't have time to go into it. You can see the law itself and ask yourselves regarding the language, it's Hebrew, regarding settlement of Jews in the state. There are other provisions that were brought to the court in the petition, but Article 1 is the major reason for the petition. And the claim was that by Article 1, the non-Jews are excluded from thinking about Israel as their country. So the question of Republican citizenship we talked about earlier. Now, there is a problem in bringing the petition to the court. So it's actually the claim here that somehow the basic law is non-constitutional, which is a catch-22, because how can a constitution be non-constitutional? There is discussion in some of the discussion in the decision of the Supreme Court, which was just handed down this last summer. Okay, the decision is from July 2021. So President Chayut, the president of the Supreme Court, said, this is paragraph 27 of the decision.
Have we lost Amichai there?
Amichai is freeze.
He's frozen. Yeah, it's very cold there in Israel.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's see what happens. While we're waiting for Amichai to unfreeze, I'm going to put a question to Matthijs from Shufeng. Matthijs, if you're still there. Were there any Arab representatives at the San Remo conference? And did they object to the British mandate and their commitment to the Balfour Declaration? So, yeah, the San Remo conference, were the Arabs represented?
The Arabs were, well, it was a conference of the Allied and associated powers. So I'm not sure whether either the Arabs or the Zionist movement was represented there. They were represented in the Versailles, the General Peace Conference in Paris. There were both representatives of the Zionist movement and of the Arabs. But I'm not sure about San Remo. I have to look it up, but it was their conference of those powers who had to decide on the future of the Ottoman Empire. And as far as, well, I'm not sure whether they were as a kind of observers there. I have to.
Andrew?
There is our colleague.
I'm sorry, Andrew, I was disconnected, but you have to remind me until when, I don't know, how long did I speak to myself?
Okay, so you were just explaining President Hayut's decision, and you just started that explanation.
Okay, so just a second. I'm sorry, I apologize for that mishap. Okay, so this slide, right?
Yep.
Okay, so I'll just a second here. Okay, so President Hayut was saying, and I'll just skip over what I spoke to myself earlier, is that there is a nucleus of identity to the country, and it's a Jewish and democratic identity of the country, and specifically with regards to Article 1, which I stated earlier. Okay, is that regarding the state of Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people, President Hayut said the following, and I think this is an important statement by the court. I believe that the purposive interpretation of section 1C of the Basic Law on Nationality leads to the conclusion that this section does not deal with the right to internal self-determination or the group rights of minority in Israel, and therefore cannot be considered a section that denies such rights in principle. So President Hayut is explicit in her interpretation. So indeed, as an external matter, Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people, meaning Israel is allowed, for example, to prefer Jews in entrance. So the law of national return, right? So the Jews have preference in entering Israel. But once within Israel, there is no preference to any group, to the Jews over the Arabs. So the groups within Israel are equal, not only in their specific rights, but also as groups. And in conclusion, I don't want to say that there are no tensions between the Jewish and democratic identity of the state of Israel. But it's important, the statement of Justice Hayut in paragraph 40. The foundations of Israel evolving constitution, the Jewish identity and the democratic identity exist side by side, without one canceling out the other or overcoming the other. Notwithstanding the fact that tensions might arise between these principles, these are complementing and mutually supplementing principles. Thank you very much. And I apologize once again for being disconnected for a second there.
No problem, no need to apologize. Thank you, Amichai, so much for that. Okay, people, I'm conscious we are running a little bit over time. I'm quite understand if people need to leave, but we will continue with a few questions and answers. And I'm going to jump straight into you, Amichai, with a question from Hans Peter. What is the status of the Arab language? The media like to attack Israel, saying that Arabic has officially disappeared or is regarded as a secondary.
No, it's not.
So the law indeed says that Hebrew is the official language of Israel, but it specifically accorded Arabic a special status, and it's also explicitly said that the principled claim that Hebrew is the formal language does not in any way negate any use of the Arab language as was previously understood. What it means, and this is the way the court interpreted it, that this is more a cultural statement, like the flag of the Jewish state, the national anthem. The fact that Hebrew is the formal language represents the general cultural identity of the state. It does not in any way infringe on the rights of Arabs to use their language in any formal or informal interactions with any state agency or in education or in any way.
Okay, thank you. Before we move on to the next question, I mean, we see a lot of riots going on, don't we, in Israel at the moment? It seems that a lot of the Arabs, well, I don't know whether these riots are related to this, but it seems to me many Arabs don't feel particularly at home or respected in their Arab identity. Is that a true, fair comment or not?
It cannot be denied, it should not be denied, that during the existence of the State of Israel, the 70-something years of existence, there was discrimination against, I'm not speaking about now the Palestinians in the territories, I'm speaking within Israel, there was discrimination. The previous government, it cannot be denied because it's a fact of reality. It's not, I think there is almost no one who disputes this. This was in terms of budgetary means, education, entry into the workforce. In the past, I would say, decade or decade and a half, all governments, right-wing or left-wing, have done immense attempts to rectify this situation. It will take time, but for example, just the last budget that was passed promises enormous amounts of money intended to rectify some of it. And once again, I'm not, a political scientist. I'm a lawyer. The law here, I think, went before reality in terms that equality was clear before in law for 3 or 4 decades. It is now becoming, I believe, also reality. If one claims of specific discrimination, there might be, a specific truth to it. But I think immense efforts are being made to, including preferential treatment of Arabs in government service, for example, in recruiting them for government service, etc. Once again, I'm not trying to justify that there was no discrimination along the history of Israel. There was, but this I think is now changing.